Okay, I have some questions just about music and get back to
Okay.
Mitchell's. Just tell me how you got started and on the guitar and stuff like
I
that.
was uh, I was 13 years old. My cousin had gotten a guitar, and I was just jealous of him and wanted one too. And by the time I was 15, I was a monster, a hot shot. I was left-handed, and I learned right-handed, and it took me a year to get over that. By the time I was 15, I was the best I knew, or that anyone around me knew, at rock and roll, which is all I was interested in playing. And I got lots of gigs, and I went on the road and played with all sorts of strange bands. You know, everything. Polka bands, black bands, Mexican bands, Puerto Rican bands, college fraternity bands, and just kept boogieing on.
When you're on the road, what was the road all around the country or just in the Bay Area?
Midwest. I'm from Chicago, so it was all through the Midwest, and then down south in the Chitlin circuit when I was playing with colored bands.
What was it like? It must have been kind of. Was it?
Well, when you're a kid, you accept things so easily. You know, well, I'll tell you a funny story. Once this was not on the road, but this I was a little older. Sometimes I remember a time it got really intolerable. It was. Uh, Let me differentiate. Being on the road and being young and being white in a band that was being with musicians that were much, much older than you, like your father's age or your grandfather's age, you know, just the attempt to keep up with the peer pressure made it easy for you, sort of. You didn't notice how scungy everything was, and that you were traveling with a low crowd because you just wanted to be accepted, you know. So and they were quite willing to accept you because you were a kid and you could play good and all that. So, and I was from a very rich family too, as a matter of fact. And like many kids in the '50s, I had a real affection and afición for funk. You know, I mean, my aesthetic was based on like if I couldn't be tough, I mean that's what I wanted to be. Like if I couldn't be a greaser. Or like when I first discovered what I first wanted to be was like a greaser, like a Carl Perkins or a Jerry Lee or a Gene Vincent. I guess he was the greasiest that ever lived. You know, really black leather guy. But I found living in Chicago even funkier than that was to be colored. I mean, if you couldn't be a greaser, man, wow, the funk. You see, these people kicked ass and everything. I mean, they fought, which is something a Jewish kid like me just never did. You know, and if it was funky to be a Gene Vincent or something like that, to be a nigger. I mean, there was just no word for that. That was, you know, and to play with these black bands and go to all these funky places and hear this music that I loved and just, I mean, I was living the life, you know, I was living the aesthetic. I mean, if it was cool to be like Elvis, to be what Elvis thought was cool, well, that was the coolest in the world. But there was a time when I got older and was starting to look at music on a more musicological basis. Not just, you know, I was more than a player. I was an analytical player. I was wondering how it got this way and where did this music come from and all like that. And I was really sort of a folklorist. And I remember once, I was around 19 years old, I went on a field trip sort of with this old black blues singer named Big Joe Williams. Not the guy from Count Basie's band, but another old, the real thing. I mean, the real, like Robert Johnson, the wandering, illiterate black musician. He's still alive. He was like, that time it was very, very, we had a very paternal relationship. He was very much like a dad or a grandfather, an old uncle. And we went down to St. Louis to look for these blues singers who had been very popular in the 30s and hadn't recorded since then. We went down to East St. Louis, which is a mostly black town. This was on 4th of July weekend. And I remember that it was real hot, and I had really gotten drunk the night before on the 3rd, really drunk on gin, and we were staying in this stone. I mean, Chicago had such funky tenements, but I didn't know what funky was until I got to East St. Louis, man, because there's just no words for this, you know.
What describe them? What did it?
Well, I'm getting to it. There was where we stayed. I remember the night of the 3rd. We stayed at one of Joe's female relatives' house, she was someone's common law lady, and the husband had long gone, and there was dozens of kids there, and there was roaches everywhere, and it was very little furniture, and incredibly, he was there to fuck this woman is why he wanted to stay there. It was some relative that he'd never gotten around to incesting it with back in his youth, so he was back there to give it one more poke. And he had got me real good and drunk on gin, and I had never been that drunk on gin, and I woke up with my first real immense hangover. And Joe was the type of guy that could not drink. When he drank, he became really disturbed, mentally disturbed. It brought him out the Mr. Hyde in him. And I woke up that July 4th morning in East St. Louis in this like 110-degree weather, incredibly hot. And he was standing over me like this demon, like this devil. His eyes were little and red, and he was salivating. He had a pig nose, a snoot, a barbecued snoot on a fork, dripping this hot snoot grease on my chest. He was just all drunk on gin and peppermint schnapps, and and I woke up and I looked at him. I spent the whole day, and he was like insane, out of his mind. He cut me, stabbed me that day through the hand in this drunken frenzy. We'd spent the whole day driving around the grossest ghetto I'd ever seen. I was deathly ill with this nauseating hangover. Finally, we get to the absolutely grossest part of the grossest ghetto. We climb up these stairs, back stairs, and we get up on this balcony, and they're sitting on the balcony. See, was this 12-year-old girl who weighed around 700 pounds. Real, I'm not kidding you, maybe 400. But, sideshow proportions, and a total imbecile. And she was taking barbecued ribs and dipping them in this about 8-day-old mayonnaise jar that had been left out in the sun. And it sort of looked like old unguentine or zinc ointment. She was dipping them in and her scraping them on her teeth. And she was dressed in flour sacking, and she had been, I'd found out, on the porch all summer because she had grown so obese that year they couldn't move her inside. And when fall came and weather turned chill, they would have to move to a new location to get her in some walls somewhere so she would be warm. I remember they shat in a closet. There wasn't even a toilet. The downstairs was evicted, so they shat in a hole in the closet. And whatever radical chic pretensions I may have had then just flew out the window. It was too gross for me. I mean, they had to live that way, man. I have no motherfucking choice. And so I said to Joe, I said, listen, Dana, Joe, I'm going home. And he was real drunk and crazy. He said, you're not going home, and blah, blah, blah. And we argued and fought, and he cut me. And that last thing I remember is as we left town, he was walking with his guitar in his hand, his amplifier, and his tape recorder, and just walking down that